Now, it simply isn't possible for all video games to live up to their potential. After all, so much goes into the creation of a game that things won't always hit the mark, and that's fine. They can't all be influential masterpieces, right? And while terrible games can be incredibly disheartening for eager players who've thrown down their money, it's not only the players who get vocal about their overpowering hate for a video game. Sometimes developers make no bones about the fact that they cannot stand a game they made. And that's what we're here to talk about today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game developers who hate their own creation. Number 10. Core Design, Tomb Raider. Though Tomb Raider is one of the most iconic and influential video game IPs, and say it with me kids, of all time, that doesn't mean that those who helped bring it to fruition have much enduring love for it. Tomb Raider's creation is largely credited to artist Toby Gard, who came up with both the concept and Lara Croft herself. However, Gard was left frustrated with their publisher Eidos for their heavily sexualized marketing campaign, prompting him to leave Core Design during early production of Tomb Raider 2. Gard, who wasn't thrilled about the idea of Tomb Raider becoming a franchise anyway, said this of his decision to leave. "I had problems when they started putting lower cut clothes on her, and sometimes taking her clothes off completely. It's really weird when you see a character of yours doing these things. You can't believe it. You think, she can't do that. I've spent my life drawing pictures of things and they're mine, you know? They belong to me." Gard forewent hundreds of thousands of pounds in royalty payments that he would have received had he stayed at Core for even a short period. Such was his growing distaste for the very thing he created. Though Gard did eventually return to oversee the Legend trilogy in the mid to late 2000s, Tomb Raider at this point had shifted over to a new team at Crystal Dynamics, who didn't bring the same baggage, or as it's also known, hate, for the IP that the now defunct Core Design did. Number 9. Sega, Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Even the most casual Sonic fan will surely remember the universal disdain for the 2006 Sonic the Hedgehog reboot, where basically every aspect of the game was widely panned, with many even deeming it the worst Sonic game ever made. That was me. I'm on that train. Yep. And though Sega has put out their fair share of mediocre Sonic titles over the years, they certainly weren't blinkered to how especially poor Sonic 06 truly was. In October 2010, the publisher made the radical decision to stop selling Sonic games with average or below average Metacritic scores, resulting in a number of Sonic games, including Sonic 06, being delisted from storefronts. Sega claimed that they made the decision to avoid confusing customers and increase the value of the Sonic brand, which is a pretty clear statement of condemnation. After all, how often does a publisher see so little worth in a game from one of its major IPs as to literally not let customers buy it and give them money? In the corporate world, hate doesn't get any more obvious than that. Number 8. Suda51, Shadows of the Damned. You've got to hand it to the inimitable Suda51 and his unrelenting honesty, especially when discussing his crushing disappointment with his 2011 actioner Shadows of the Damned. Now see, Suda collaborated on the game with Resident Evil co-creator Shinji Mikami, who will be showing up himself on our list a little later, and was sold as an ambitious fusion of their respective styles as game developers. Suda spent years developing various story, character, and gameplay concepts, yet EA ultimately forced him to scrap the majority of his ideas in favour of more conventional, formulaic action game tropes. Before the game came out, Suda had gone through 4 separate iterations of what it could be. Even though reviews skewed relatively positively, Suda said that he felt the meetings with EA were like court interrogations, and Shinji Mikami even dared to suggest that the game broke his heart. He said of Suda, "I think his heart was broken. He's such a unique creation, so it seems to me that he was not quite comfortable with making this game. The game was nothing like Suda had planned, which is rather sad." As such, it's clear that Suda doesn't have many good memories from his time working on Shadows of the Damned. Number 7. Naoki Yoshida, Final Fantasy XIV version 1.0. There's no getting around it. The original 1.0 release of the MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV in 2010 was an absolute dumpster fire of wonky gameplay that proved to be blatantly unfinished. It was bad enough that the original iteration of the game shut down barely 2 years after launching, despite a new director-producer, Naoki Yoshida, being brought aboard shortly after launch to try and whip it into a workable shape. Yoshida ultimately remained on to oversee development of Final Fantasy's replacement, A Realm Reborn, which launched in 2013 to strong acclaim and remains a much much-loved MMO to this very day. But in a 2019 interview, when asked whether 1.0 might ever return in a limited capacity for new players to experience it, Yoshida simply replied by laughing and shouting, "Nightmare." And then he followed up with a more eloquent response. "We acknowledge that the request is there, but those are the people that do not know just how scary the original Final Fantasy XIV is." While Yoshida himself wasn't responsible for Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 being such a mess, he was nevertheless charged with spending years of his life fixing it, so his passionately volcanic response is certainly understandable. Number 6. Jaeger development. Spec Ops: The Line multiplayer. Much as Spec Ops: The Line is a regular fixture on our lists, we rarely talk about the game's multiplayer suite, and that's typically with good reason. You see, the generic competitive multiplayer mode felt aggressively tacked onto the game at the behest of publisher 2K Games, and as it turns out, the mode was in fact not completed by the main studio Jaeger development, but actually farmed out to another outfit. Within just 2 months of Spec Ops release, Jaeger's lead designer Corey Davis offered a damning statement about the perfunctory multiplayer and how it thoroughly ran counter to the themes of the campaign. It sheds a negative light on all the meaningful things we did in the single-player experience. The multiplayer game's tone is entirely different, and it was a waste of money. No one is playing it, and I don't even feel like it's part of the overall package. It's another game rammed onto the disc like a cancerous growth, threatening to destroy the best things about the experience that the team at Jaeger put their hearts and souls into creating. Well, tell us how you really feel, Corey. Given that none of the game's 50 trophies or achievements could be unlocked through multiplayer, Jaeger made it pretty damn clear that they had no interest in encouraging players to touch the multiplayer offering. Number 5. Shinji Mikami. Resident Evil. Shinji Mikami is an undeniable gaming industry legend, best known for co-creating the Resident Evil franchise as well as directing the original 1996 game. After the first game's mammoth success, Capcom appointed Mikami as a producer who oversaw development of all mainline Resident Evil games up to and including Resident Evil 4, as well as an abandoned Resident Evil game that was reworked into the original Devil May Cry. After spending 8 years as a producer, Mikami left Capcom following completion of Resident Evil 4, and in more recent interviews has stated that working on Resident Evil was actually the unhappiest period of his career due to his inability to work on new creative projects. He said in an interview last year, "I was away from the scene for 8 years while I was in my 30s, when I was the most fat. It was very frustrating to be a producer in my 30s when I was at my peak as a game creator." Mikami added that he considered resigning much earlier, but due to his respect for his superiors and their suggestions that he oversee the franchise, he stuck it out. As much as Resident Evil made Mikami an industry rockstar, it sure sounds like he wishes he could have just directed the first game and immediately washed his hands of it. Number 4. Nintendo Virtual Boy. In 1995, Nintendo released the Virtual Boy, their infamous virtual reality console, which was a catastrophic critical and commercial dud. Effectively released to the market unfinished while Nintendo shifted resources to the N64, the Virtual Boy was panned for its underwhelming 3D headset and poor graphics, as well as its high cost of entry. To date, it remains the only Nintendo console to sell less than 1 million units, and was discontinued less than a year after release. After this, Nintendo basically acted like the Virtual Boy was a group hallucination amongst players and that it never actually existed, a low-key attempt to gaslight the world into forgetting about it ever being a thing. It was painfully clear that Nintendo saw the device as a major embarrassment, such that it's been given only the most basic passing mention by the studio over the last near 3 decades. In recent years, they've proven a little keener to poke self-reflexive fun at the device's failure, such as Animal Crossing New Leaf featuring a collectible Virtual Boy with an accompanying description which makes fun of its garish red LED screen, and even acknowledging it in a 2016 Instagram post. Even so, it's still something Nintendo scarcely brings up, and despite the success of the Nintendo 3DS, they've made no attempt to preserve titles that are still trapped on the Virtual Boy. Number 3. Capcom Devil May Cry 2. It's no secret at all that Devil May Cry 2 was deemed a grim disappointment by many fans, largely due to its easier difficulty and alterations to protagonist Dante's personality. Capcom certainly heard the vocal criticisms of the rushed, chaotic production, enough so that DMC 3 and 4 weren't merely major returns to form but were also set chronologically before the second game, until DMC 5 retconned this at least, meaning that they could effectively ignore everything that happened within it. The publisher has largely downplayed the game's existence ever since its its 2003 release, and even made sly jokes at its expense during Dante's appearances in the Beautiful Joe series, such as having him not remember any events from that game. And though DMC5 did make fleeting reference to the events of the second game, it's painfully clear that the studio views this first sequel as an embarrassment, a black mark on their otherwise extremely accomplished character action franchise. Number 2. Running with Scissors, Postal 3. Postal creators Running with Scissors have always been an irreverent studio, for better or worse, and when Postal 3 released to universal scorn from critics and players alike in 2011, they held their hands up in self-disgust. Shortly after release, studio head Vince Desai admitted the game wasn't up to par, and less than a year after its release, they opted to pull a Sonic and remove Postal 3 from storefronts entirely. Running with Scissors flat out told players that doing so was in the best interest of the Postal community, and suggested players buy their earlier games instead, which were a far superior product for a lot less money. It was eventually revealed that the game had effectively been outsourced to another developer and publisher, the former aptly titled Trash Masters, a decision which the studio called both a disaster and a mistake. Studio producer John Merchant, meanwhile, called the game a broken mess, and added that Running with Scissors don't regard it as the third Postal game, just a dodgy spin-off that should have never happened. Oof. And number 1, Dong Nguyen, Flappy Bird. Mobile game Flappy Bird was released in May 2013 and became an unexpected sensation of the next year, with the creator Dong Nguyen seeking to offer a simple alternative to the massively successful Angry Birds. Despite mixed reviews, it was a colossal hit and downloaded more than 50 million times on the App Store alone, earning the developer $50,000 per day through sales and ad revenue. But by February of 2014, Dong decided to pull the game from storefronts, and though many initially suspected a legal challenge from the Angry Birds creator, he actually revealed that he simply felt intense guilt over the game's addictive nature, enough so that it caused him to lose sleep. In a statement at the same time, he said that Flappy Bird had ruined his simple life and that he hated the game. A revised version, Flappy Bird's Family, was however released later that year, though largely fell upon deaf ears as the Flappy Bird craze had come and gone. His disdain for Flappy Bird was actually enough that a widely circulated hoax even claimed that he had killed himself as a result of the game's shock success, and a lot of people believed it. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 video game developers who hated their own creation. I hope that you enjoyed that, and let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Instagram, where it's @RetroJ, but the O is a 0, and I hope to see you over there, and you can check out all my Warhammer paintings. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. Even though we spoke today about people who hate their own creations, let's turn that into a bit of self-love, shall we? And remind ourselves that we are good people. We deserve love, happiness, and success. And you're a massive ledge, my friend, and I wish you nothing but the best in your life, alright? Now go out there and smash it today. I believe in ya. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.